The street sweeper driver noticed the Bobcat 3 blocks before anyone else did, and even then he was not entirely sure he had seen it correctly. It was just after dawn in the small town of Fairwick, the hour when the streets still belonged more to delivery vans, sanitation crews, and the occasional dog walker than to full daytime traffic. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving behind gutters filled with wet leaves, broken twigs, and muddy runoff that had washed down from the hills above town. Puddles still reflected pale strips of sky between rows of brick storefronts and narrow clapboard houses. The air smelled of damp asphalt, gasoline, and fresh rain-soaked earth. It was the kind of morning when the world looked briefly scrubbed clean before the noise of the day returned. Dale Hensley had been driving the municipal street sweeper for almost 17 years, which was long enough for him to trust his eyes, but also long enough to know that early light and repetitive work could play small tricks on a tired brain. At 58, he had the broad frame and slow, economical movements of a man who had spent decades in practical vehicles, looking down roads, checking mirrors, and reading patterns in pavement and debris. He liked quiet shifts. He liked machinery that did what it was supposed to do. And he liked dawn routes best because there were fewer people, fewer cars, fewer chances for someone to do something foolish in front of several tons of moving steel and spinning brushes. That morning he was taking the sweeper down Willow Street, crawling along the curb line while the side broom spun wet leaves into the vacuum path, when he caught movement in the passenger side mirror. At first he thought it was a dog running the sidewalk. Then the shape came clear in the edge of the mirror glass. Lean, low, tufted ears, short tail, spotted coat darkened by rain. A bobcat. It was trotting along the curb behind the sweeper, not sprinting, not crossing away into a yard, just keeping pace. Dale frowned and checked again. Still there. "Well, that's different," he muttered to the empty cab. He drove another half-block, expecting the animal to vanish into the hedges or cut across an alley. It didn't. Instead, it kept following the right rear quarter of the sweeper, staying just outside the spray of water and grit, eyes fixed not on Dale himself, but on the gutter line directly behind the truck. When he slowed for a storm drain crossing, the bobcat slowed. When he rolled forward again, it came with him. By the time he reached the corner of Willow and Sycamore, he was no longer amused. The bobcat wasn't acting like an animal startled into bad choices. It wasn't panicked, limping, or aggressive. It looked focused in a way that made him uncomfortable. Dale had seen wild things in town before: foxes cutting through vacant lots, deer wandering subdivisions after dark, once even a coyote sleeping under a church bus. But a bobcat following a street sweeper for blocks in full morning light was something else. He keyed his radio. "Marlene, you on dispatch?" Marlene Reese answered from Public Works, her voice still thick with first coffee gravel. "Go ahead, Dale." He kept one eye on the right mirror. "You're gonna think I'm making this up, but I got a bobcat tailing the sweeper on Willow." A pause, then, "A what?" "A bobcat." Another pause, longer this time. "Alive, I assume?" Dale snorted once despite himself. "Very much so, and it won't leave." Marlene had worked the morning desk for the streets department for 11 years and had heard enough strange things from sanitation crews, water crews, and public works drivers to know not to dismiss the odd too fast. "Is it hurt?" she asked. Dale watched the mirror. The bobcat came closer as he slowed near another curb inlet, then stopped to stare hard at the storm grate before resuming its trot. "No," he said slowly, "but I think it wants something." The moment he said it, he knew how absurd it sounded. Still, the idea lodged. The bobcat was not simply following the vehicle. It was following the gutter line the sweeper was clearing. More specifically, it seemed obsessed with every storm grate he passed, but only for a second or two each, until they approached one near the old elementary school, where the curb dipped lower and runoff from the hill always collected after heavy rain. There, the bobcat suddenly surged forward, darted past the sweeper's rear corner, and planted itself near the grate before the truck reached it. Dale hit the brake. The sweeper growled, shuddered, and stopped half a truck length short of the curb inlet. The bobcat stood beside the rectangular storm grate, body taut, staring down into the black slots between the bars. Then it looked up at Dale's cab, then back to the grate, then down again. Its urgency was so plain that Dale felt the back of his neck tighten. He set the parking brake, climbed down from the cab, and immediately held one hand out, more from instinct than any belief the animal would understand. "Easy," he said under his breath. The street was empty except for a parked sedan, a tipped recycling bin down the block, and the sound of the sweeper idling heavily behind him. The Bobcat did not flee. It moved only 3 steps back, enough to make space near the grate, then stared into it again. Dale approached slowly. Rainwater still ran in a thin stream along the curb, slipping through leaves and cigarette butts into the grate. The metal bars were slick with road grime and wet sycamore leaves. At first he saw nothing but dark water moving below. Then he heard it, a faint sound under the traffic hush and engine rumble. A tiny, cracked cry. Dale straightened so fast his knees popped. "Oh, hell," he said softly. He knelt at once and peered into the grate. The light angle was terrible, the opening shadowed and narrow. He shifted to one side, squinting between the bars. The storm drain box dropped a few feet below the street and then funneled into a pipe. Debris had gathered in one corner, leaves, twigs, a fast food cup, muddy water eddying around it. And on top of that debris, half wedged against the curbside wall where the runoff stream hit hardest, was a bobcat kitten. It was tiny, sodden, and shaking, clinging to the pile with oversized paws while water pushed against its chest. One of its hind legs had slipped awkwardly between 2 bits of bent wire or rebar fragment in the lower drain basket, trapping it just enough that it could not climb higher or turn free. Each time it tried, the debris shifted and the current washed over its face. It lifted its head, cried weakly, and slipped again. The mother bobcat made a harsh, tearing sound behind Dale. He turned just enough to see her pacing the curb line in a tight, agitated line, then coming back to the grate, then pacing again. She had not followed the sweeper because she feared it. She had followed because it was the one machine in town that stopped at every curb, every drain, every place rainwater and trouble collected. Somehow, in the blunt, desperate logic of survival, she had chosen the vehicle that might make someone look down. Dale keyed his radio so hard he nearly dropped it. "Marlene." "Yeah?" "Call fire. Call animal control. I got a live one in the storm drain." He looked at the grate again, then at the water level, then at the bobcat. "And make it quick." Marlene did not waste a second asking if he was sure. The difficulty was obvious immediately. The grate was bolted, heavy cast iron. Public Works could open it, but not with bare hands and not in the next 30 seconds. The kitten did not look like it had 30 comfortable minutes. Dale ran back to the sweeper, grabbed the pry bar and utility hook he kept for storm debris, and returned to the curb while the bobcat tracked every move he made. "Come on," he muttered, dropping to one knee beside the grate. The bars were pinned with 2 recessed bolts clogged with grit. The pry bar would not lift it cleanly, but one corner had enough play from age that he thought he might shift it if he got the angle right. He shoved the hook through the center slot to test the weight. The grate barely moved. Not enough. The bobcat came closer then, close enough that Dale could see the wet whiskers on her muzzle and the fast rise and fall of her sides. She lowered her head toward the grate and made a deep, urgent sound he would later remember more clearly than anything else about that morning. It was not threatening. It was pleading without losing its wildness. "Yeah," Dale said, breath tight in his chest. "I hear you." The first person to arrive was not the fire department, but Rosa Kim from the water department, because Public Works Dispatch caught her truck only 2 streets away. Rosa was 36, efficient, compact, and the sort of person who seemed to carry 3 useful tools at any given time without appearing burdened by them. She jumped out before her truck fully stopped, took one look at the bobcat by the curb and said, "That is a sentence I never thought I'd live in." Dale pointed to the grate. "Kitten underneath." She was kneeling beside him before he finished. "You got a key?" "Not for these bolts." Rosa sprinted back to her truck and returned with a manhole wrench, socket extension, and a pair of heavy gloves. The bobcat backed off only 5 yards this time, then stopped and watched. Together, Dale and Rosa cleared the bolt heads as fast as they could with a screwdriver and gloved fingers. Mud packed in the threads, leaves stuck under everything. The kitten cried again below, weaker than before. The waterline pulsed around its body with every passing runoff surge from up the hill. Rosa jammed the socket in, grunted, and got the first bolt to turn. Dale took the second. The grate was old and reluctant, but it moved. By the time the fire department arrived with a pickup and two responders, the bolts were out and Dale and Rosa had shifted one side of the grate high enough to wedge the pry bar underneath. Lieutenant Ben Carter took in the whole scene: street sweeper idling, utility trucks half-parked on the curb, a bobcat pacing at the edge of the sidewalk, two public works workers covered in wet gutter sludge, and asked only one question. "Is the drain box deeper than it looks?" Rosa nodded. 3.5 feet, maybe. Pipe outlet on one side. Ben dropped to the curb and shined his light through the gap. "There it is." He looked at Dale. "We get this open all the way. Somebody needs to go in fast but careful. No crowding the cat. No sudden moves." Animal control was still at least 10 minutes out. Nobody suggested waiting. The grate came up with a metallic scrape and was dragged just far enough back to expose the catch basin opening. A rush of damp air smelling of mud, leaves, and stormwater rose from below. The kitten flattened itself against the debris pile, terrified by the light and movement, but too weak to do much more than shiver. Its hind leg was visibly pinned in the bent wire tangle. Ben handed Dale a pair of elbow-length work gloves. "You're the one it's been following," he said. "Maybe that matters." Dale almost laughed at how ridiculous that sounded, but he took the gloves anyway and swung his boots into the basin. The drop was awkward but manageable. Cold water surged around his ankles. The concrete walls were slick, and the outlet pipe mouth yawned dark on one side, half clogged with storm trash. Up above, the mother bobcat had moved to the curb edge again, low and rigid, every muscle held in visible strain. Dale could feel her attention like heat. "Easy now," he murmured as he crouched in the water. Up close, the kitten looked impossibly small. Mud streaked its face. Its eyes were huge and wild. The hind leg was not broken as far as he could tell, but the wire had twisted around just above the paw and trapped it against the drain basket bracket. Dale steadied the kitten with one gloved hand and tried to free the leg with the other. The moment he touched it, the little body writhed and gave a thin scream. Above him, the mother bobcat answered with a raw, churring cry that made Rosa flinch and Ben lift one hand instinctively toward the sidewalk, though the animal did not charge. She stayed there. She stayed because staying was all she had left. "Need cutters," Dale said through clenched teeth. Ben dropped a compact cutter down to him. Dale worked blind for a second, feeling for metal, wire, fur, anything that would tell his hands what his eyes could not fully see in the shifting brown water. He found the wire. Bent, jagged, probably old reinforcement or broken basket tie. One clean snip loosened part of it. Not enough. The kitten twisted again. The debris pile shifted under the current. Dale could feel time narrowing. "One more," Rosa said from above, voice tight. Dale repositioned, slid the cutter deeper, and clipped again. The wire sprang loose. The kitten's leg came free all at once, and the little body lurched sideways toward the moving water. Dale caught it against his chest on instinct and nearly lost his own footing. Water surged over his boots. The kitten coughed, gave one ragged cry, and scrabbled weakly at his glove. "Got it," he breathed. The mother bobcat cried out. Dale climbed out of the drain box with the kitten cupped in both hands as carefully as if he were carrying a lit match through dry grass. Ben and Rosa backed away immediately to give him room. The sidewalk felt suddenly too bright, too open. The bobcat stood maybe 10 feet away now, not advancing, not retreating, simply vibrating with urgent restraint. Dale knelt and set the kitten on a folded fire jacket Ben had laid on the curb. Then everyone moved back. The mother rushed in. She went first to the kitten's face, then neck, then chest, then the freed hind leg, licking with a frantic speed that made it clear she was not cleaning so much as counting, verifying, making sure everything that should still be there was still there. The kitten answered with thin, breathy cries and pushed its head under her chest. Dale turned his face away for 1 second and rubbed the heel of his glove hard against one eye, then hoped no one noticed. The kitten tried to stand and failed. Its hind leg folded awkwardly beneath it, not broken maybe, but too numb or strained to bear weight. The mother tested the scruff gently and lifted an inch, then set it down when the body sagged wrong. She licked the leg again, tried again, same result. Animal control finally arrived just then in a county SUV, and Officer Renee Talbot stepped out to find a scene that looked less like city maintenance and more like some old story retold in concrete and rainwater. She assessed from a distance, listened fast to Ben's summary, and did the most sensible thing possible. Nothing sudden. "She's still engaged and not fleeing," Renee said quietly. "That's our best chance." A folded municipal sandbag was slid near the fire jacket to give the kitten a drier, more stable surface. The mother accepted it by ignoring it, which everyone took as success. She nudged the kitten partly onto it and resumed grooming. The little body shivered less after a minute. It lifted its head more steadily. Once, it even managed a weak little scramble forward before collapsing again. Traffic on the block had long since stopped. Neighbors stood at a respectful distance. A school crossing guard who had wandered over from the next intersection held back a cluster of children and, for once in her life, had no idea what explanation to give them beyond, "Be quiet and watch from here." The street, usually full of engine noise by that hour, seemed suspended in a hush of idling vehicles, wet pavement, and held breath. Then the mother tried again. This time she took the scruff higher, lifted carefully, and moved 3 steps before setting the kitten down. She licked the hind leg, repositioned, lifted again. Slowly, stubbornly, in short carries and pauses, she moved the kitten up the grassy verge toward the sycamore hedge, where the neighborhood drainage path cut behind the houses. Nobody followed. Nobody crowded. Dale stood by the open storm grate, gloves dripping gutter water, and watched her work a problem that had dragged her through blocks of city streets behind a machine she had no reason to trust, except that it stopped where the storm drains were. At the edge of the hedge, she paused and looked back. Dale would never have described that moment as gratitude. He wasn't built that way, and he knew better than to make wild things smaller by dressing them in easy human meaning. But he knew what had happened. A mother bobcat had followed a street sweeper for blocks until the driver checked the storm grate. She had done the only thing left. That was enough. Then she vanished into the wet green dark with the kitten against her chest. The whole street seemed to release something after she was gone. Rosa sat down on the curb and laughed once from pure spent nerves. Ben started giving orders again, because firefighters always did once the impossible part was over. Renee logged the drainage hazard and flagged the bent basket wire for emergency repair. Marlene radioed 3 times wanting status, because the whole public works yard had heard fragments of the rescue and could make no sense of them. Dale looked into the open catch basin one last time and said, mostly to himself, "Well, guess I'm checking every grate on this route from now on." He did. By that afternoon, the bent internal wire was cut out, the drain basket repaired, and every storm inlet on Willow and Sycamore got a quick inspection. Public Works added great hazard checks after storms. The town naturally told the story by lunchtime. Some versions had the bobcat running in front of the sweeper like a traffic guide. Others claimed Dale had heard the kitten from half a block away. He ignored most of it. When people asked him what really happened, he kept it plain. "A bobcat followed the sweeper until I stopped at the right storm grate. Then I heard crying. That was enough." 2 evenings later, Renee texted him a trail camera, still from the drainage path behind the sycamore hedge. In the grainy dusk image, a bobcat moved through wet grass with 2 kittens behind her. One was smaller and held a hind leg a little stiffly, but it was walking. Dale stared at the photo for a long time before forwarding it to Marlene, who replied with a single line, "Worth the overtime." And it was. Because on an ordinary storm cleanup morning, while the town still yawned itself awake and wet leaves gathered along the curbs, a wild mother had picked the one vehicle guaranteed to stop at every gutter and every drain, and she had followed it until someone finally looked where the water went.